Alex here with part 4 of the Respondent. I fell a little bit behind, so I'm going to go ahead and give you guys parts 4, 5, 6, and 7 over the next 4 days. Part 4 is a pretty long chapter, and while most of it seemed to be fluff, I still got a good amount of information out of this chapter. I'm definitely looking forward to this video. I can say that he spent a lot more time talking about the what he called profound parental dysfunction in referring to his own parents. He talks about how he, thought at the time that he's in the mental health facility that he is emotionally abandoned while he's been there, and then he realized actually during his whole marriage, and then he realized actually during his whole life, which is somewhat consistent with how I felt. Only um, he goes into some pretty bad things again with regards to his mom and how she I guess was the more violent, unstable one, and his father wasn't protective at all and just allowed it all to happen. He talks a little bit about how he felt that he protected his siblings because his dad wouldn't, and I think what he meant by that is he protected his siblings from his mom. He goes into some stories a little bit later on, and I'll talk about that in a second. I think one story in specific is one that I've set aside in my notes to talk about. He talks about how he had to go with his gut a lot when he was just a kid, and that was something that he adopted into adulthood. And he kind of took this to sort of describe himself as a risk taker slash pathfinder slash pioneer. I kind of got the vibe that that's what he was doing to sort of build up into why he went and created this book. And also he does explain how this guided some of his decisions slash mistakes. So I don't know, you could either think of it as an explanation or as an excuse as to why he did things that he shouldn't have done. And those are all in my notes as well. So we'll get to those one after the other. But one thing where he sort of attributes his gut instinct helping him is in how he actually ended up getting out of the institution. He apparently asked a nurse. He asked the nurse if he could talk to her in private, so he was able to finally get, pulled into a side room. He asked the nurse how he could get out of there, and he says that she candidly told him he had two ways. Number one, request a hearing with a judge. Number two, request a hearing with a what we call in Nevada hearing masters. I don't know if they have those in California or what they call them, but there is a distinction. A judge is actually a political position in Nevada. They are either appointed by the government and then have to go through elections, or they just get straight into office from an election. Hearing masters are nothing like that happens. They get hired kind of like an employee by my understanding is the judges of the district to sort of help them out. And just as easily as they are hired, they can be fired. Whereas with an actual judge, it doesn't work that way. You remove them from office, through impeachment or an election or the Commission on Judicial Discipline. You can't just say, hey, I don't want you here anymore. In any event, he explains how the nurse told him that if he would have gone with a judge, it could be a long time before he sees the judge, and that there are, I guess, more what do they call them? Protections in place for if you go and actually see a judge. But she told him that if he wanted to see a hearing officer, and I'm just using that nomenclature from Nevada, I don't know what they call them, then he could get an immediate hearing, and that he took on a few risks in doing this because I guess the nurse said it was not appealable, and that if he wanted to see a judge afterwards, it would take a lot longer than if he would just apply to see a judge now. There were all these caveats and problems. So he ended up explaining how he at the time didn't know anything about, he just understood a judge to be a judge to be a judge. He didn't know there was a distinction between the two, and he went and chose to get an immediate hearing with the hearing master. Um, I guess I'll interject here. What would I have done? Probably the same thing, having been ignorant. Knowing now what I know, I would have probably gone with the actual judge. But it doesn't matter. He ended up getting a good outcome. So let's go ahead and go into that. He describes the process as bizarre. One of the things that really bothered him was that I guess the caseworker testified against him, that he said to the police that he was going to harm his own kids. And it came out at the hearing that in the police report, it didn't say that. It said that the police were told that by his ex. And I guess the hearing master picked up on that. He confronted the contradiction, and that ended up either being, I mean, he kind of hints that that is the reason why the hearing master sided with him. Now, he doesn't exactly say that. He doesn't say that he won. And what he says is that after the hearing, he noticed some kind of confrontation between the caseworker and the hearing master, which to me is weird. That's an ex parte sort of, I don't know, maybe that's okay over there. He said that they were arguing in the hallway, and then the caseworker walked up to him and said, if you have a place to stay, we're going to release you. And so that's also weird. I don't know. Maybe there's laws that will allow you to keep somebody unlawfully if they don't have a place to stay, but there's just a few weird things in the book that don't sound right. But what he's saying about the outcome, to me, sounds like it's a positive outcome, that they exposed a contradiction between what the caseworker was saying and what the police report indicated, or something like that, and that was good enough, apparently. He also mentions, and I guess I'll talk about this briefly, that he feels like all of the trained people involved in that process, the hearing master, the caseworker, everybody involved, he feels like even though they're trained and educated, that they are so riddled with bias that he, I guess, came to the conclusion that he trusts a jury more than he would trust all of these trained professionals, because they don't have all of these preconceived notions, biases, worldviews. They're just untrained. And anyway, he indicated that that was something that kind of was eye-opening to him, is that you would think that, according to this guy, you would think that you would want the most knowledgeable people to be looking at this stuff and making the decisions. But he indicated that they're so knowledgeable that they already think they know what you're all about without even listening to you, that they just have already decided what to do without even having talked to you. I can understand that. I get where that's coming from. So a little bit more here, checking my notes. He does talk about how he made a few calls in trying to find out where he could stay. He called his wife first. She said, take your medication, and that's it. Then he called his friend, and his friend, who had originally said he could stay with him, changed his mind. And so he, at that point, realized, this is not my friend anymore. And there's this pattern you're going to see where he reaches out to his friends, and the ones that have sort of sided with his ex, he cuts them off. And he does mention that his ex is doing the same thing. Any of his friends that are siding with him, she cuts off. And that gets talked about more in the next chapter, but I'm going to keep going for now. Anyway, finally, we know what the point of the literary script was. He talks about how just when he was about to give up, he remembered the script. He picks the script up, he looks at it, he sees a phone number, calls the agent. He ends up getting the agent's assistant, gives the agent's assistant his password. She pulls up his contact list and starts giving him phone numbers. He starts calling people. I guess he gives them a name of a person who said he can, well, two people I remember. One is Dr. Wood, which my understanding is some kind of friendly mental health specialist, friendly to him. And the other is, I guess, his neighbor, and I think his name was Brian, literal neighbor, like the house next door. I didn't feel a red or yellow flag popped up at that point. But later on in chapter 5, I do, in hindsight, realize that this is a flag. Whether it's red or yellow, I don't know. Maybe it's a red flag. But we'll talk about that with the next video in the series. For now, that wraps up part 4, which is corresponding to chapter 4 of The Respondent. If you have any questions, feel free to post them down in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time.